Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. I'm really excited about today's guest, Amber Powers. And she's got an interesting story. Of note, she lives by the mantra minimalist living, but she's going to talk about finding your authentic voice, healing, healing through emotional trauma, moving on, and flourishing. So, Amber, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Dr. Christopher.
And I know we had, in the green room, we had some audio. You talk about, kind of your story. We kind of discussed, but kind of talk about just on the surface, and then how it led you to become an influencer. And we'll talk about the healing process later on.
Sure. I grew up in a very a place, let's say, as it pertains to my faith, and women's voices really weren't heard. We were more seen than heard, and it was expected that we were to show up in that way. And so, growing and healing from that trauma as an adult led me to really, it was actually a moment where I lost my mom. She died from pancreatic cancer when she was 50 years old. And she was such a strong personality in my life, and she was a force to be reckoned with. If I didn't show up in a certain kind of way, if I didn't adhere to her standards of living, I would be shut out. And I had such fear about, losing that relationship really my entire life. But when she passed, something happened. And I all of a sudden found the freedom to discover who I truly was and what my voice had to say outside of religion and outside of a parental influence, like forcing me to be a certain kind of way. And so that led me to discover really who I was. And then once I discovered who I was, I gradually started feeling the freedom to share my voice. And what I found was the more that, excuse me, I showed up in an authentic way, and the more that I stopped being what society wanted me to be or a parental figure wanted me to be, the more people I drew to me that were similar. And I landed my ideal audience through doing that.
I love that. Sounds like you activated the law of attraction. What I love about it is there's, the RAS, and then basically it's a filter, and then basically
Yeah.
you filtered, which is quite interesting. I think a lot of people go through similar. I think after talking to, there's emotional trauma everywhere, and I think earlier generations have a little bit more, but there's different forms, which is quite interesting. So talk about this, the mindset, this idea of mindset work, and what
Mhm.
did you have to, what did, like, any resources, or what did you do,
Yeah.
what your
Yeah.
perspectives, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. In 2008, my cousin invited me to attend, it was a weekend long seminar. And being raised in a very sheltered home, this seminar introduced me to things I had never heard of, words like intention, and how intention was much different than hoping or wanting something, hoping for or wanting something. Those those words implied inaction, as where intention implied action. I began to become familiar with this law of attraction that I had never heard of before, and with intention setting. And that was kind of my infancy. That was the milk stage of my spiritual growth. And I'm so grateful for that. And as I grew, I started to read more books like The Secret. And then that evolved into The Four Agreements. And then that evolved into Creating Affluence by Deepak Chopra. And I mean, I could go on for days, right, about all of the books that we can get into. But I have become so interested, kind of the eternal student when it comes to quantum mechanics and understanding this quantum world and how it
Uh-huh.
impacts life here with us physically. And so that has been the evolution. It's been just really a seeking journey. A fun story that I like to tell. Um, I was finishing up my degree in 2000 and not
Yeah.
being exposed to any other religions other than Christian, primarily Protestant religions. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, And I had one class left to take. And so our counselor came in and he said, okay, this is what you have to wrap up. This is what you have to wrap up. And he came to me and he said, you have a decision. You can take Intro to Business Ethics to get your degree, or you can take Intro to World Religion. And I was like, well, I kind of know what I'm doing when it comes to ethics. It's either you do it or you don't, and you kind of follow your gut. But world religions, I don't know anything about. And so I decided to test out of Intro to World Religion. And I went home and I made these flashcards about what each religion or philosophy believed, their idea of heaven, or if they had an idea of heaven. And I just began to really absorb myself in that particular study. And I'll never forget, I looked at my mom, we left, she was helping me study, and we finished. We were headed to a baby shower, and I said, Mom, I don't know if I really believe that Christianity is the only way. We didn't speak for 3 months afterwards. But I would say maybe that was the moment where I was like, ooh, maybe this, there's more, right? Maybe there's more to all of this. And so that particular moment was kind of the moment where I learned that maybe it's an expansive experience, right? This journey isn't all or nothing one way, but it's an expansion of how we grow into who we are.
The more I, if you study history, there was like the Roman Catholics, and then became the Protestants, and these were like there was a bunch of wars, and basically these churches or these whatever, they were symbol. Basically, you couldn't go against it, and then slowly, and the churches did a lot of bad things. We don't have to get into it, but they were basically hypocritical. And then basically, it's like this whole narrative from everything from the mainstream media. There's this one path, and then basically there's this one religion you have to believe in, which I don't believe. Now there's talking about like spirituality, and what we're talking about is basically energy, and the universe, and God, and it's basically represented in different ways.
Right.
Represented a different way than Caucasian. It's basically how you represent good and good energy and karma, which is quite interesting because Deepak, when I read this idea of the quantum field, and I thought that karma is this, basically you do good, you'll get 10x, but then there's actually something called dharma, which is like,
Dharma.
that's like your destiny, and that's like, that's even more powerful than karmas, which is, and once you begin to tap into, these, it's really fascinating. And I've always been fascinated with the spiritual world, and it sounds like you had a awakening, which is interesting. So how did you use this awakening and intention to become an ethical, I've never heard of that, ethical influencer? Talk about that.
Yeah. So to me, I think influencing itself is maybe developing sort of a negative connotation associated with it, and people have kind of a bad taste in their mouth when you mention the word influence. And oftentimes that's because what people are promoting, they aren't living. It's that hypocrisy that you spoke of. And it's not just in what they're promoting, but in how they're presenting themselves, right? So we've all seen somebody on TikTok who's trying to dance that really just shouldn't be dancing. And it's not because they're bad. It's not because they're inherently bad at dancing. It's because it's not how they were intended to show up. Maybe you were supposed to use your voice. Maybe you were supposed to act. Maybe you were supposed to dance over here. But instead, what we have is all kinds of people pointing at things and doing all of these weird dances that aren't in line with how they actually were intended to show up. How I work with clients is by selecting people who have a very specific, strong story to share, and giving them permission to use their voice, and really refining that message so that it really hits their intended audience. And what that produces, and I know this because I'm living it, is they get to work with clients who bring them joy, and vice versa, right? So everyone enjoys working together. You're in your lane. You're standing in a place of authenticity, and you're drawing exactly who you're supposed to draw to you. And what you get with that is brands who want to work with you who are also aligned. So for me, I'm all about sustainability, minimalist lifestyle. So one of the brands that I would love to work with is Patagonia. That makes sense for my brand. Instead of just taking, $5,000, $10,000 from any brand who will pay me, I'm being intentional about selecting brands that align with my core values. And that's how I teach and lead my clients to do as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love talking about the law of attraction, which is what you're describing. And, your tribe will find you. Talk about how to find your authentic voice, through your journey. What did you learn?
So, how I found my authentic voice was through my story. And I think that that's where most people find their authentic voice, right? Through the trials that we overcome. I spoke about this earlier today in another call, and it's simply removing yourself from victim status, right? Instead of why is this happening to me, asking yourself, what is this trying to teach me? How is this showing up for me? And taking those lessons that each one of these obstacles show up to teach us and saying, what is this trying to teach me? And then taking that lesson and teaching other people as well so that they can grow without having to go through it necessarily. That's the beauty of it. We're teaching people how to hurdle that obstacle before they even come to it. And that presents a whole new stage of evolution to everyone as humans.
Yeah, I love that. And then one thing that's struck me when talking to you about your story is that you had to at some point you had to abandon and you had to basically go rediscover yourself. You basically had to find what resonated with your values and all of that because it sounds like things were forced upon you. And then
Mhm.
so how do you heal? What have you gotten over this trauma? How do you know when you're healed?
It's a journey. I think that's the case with most things in life. So one of the things that I did to promote healing, kind of start the healing journey, is I worked with a shaman and I did some what's called inner landscape work. And so that's delving into would call it shadow work, right? We're into the dark side of us because we're a dichotomy. We are light and we're dark. And so trying to bring those two pieces of ourselves to a point where there's harmony instead of a fight back and forth. So we're bringing the dark into the light and kind of letting them meet each other and cohabitate the same space. So I did shamanic work. I did a lot of reading. I went to therapy. Many different therapists have worked with me, and each person has been helpful in their own way, depending on where I was in my journey.
Yeah, quite interesting. Shamanic. I have to look into that. I've had house cleansing through a shaman,
Yes.
and it's actually been quite remarkable. Their abilities. Um, and another great resource is talking about this body keeps a score, where it's basically different parts of your body store those emotional
Mm-hmm.
traumas. Getting Reiki sessions, sometimes they'll
Yep.
they'll say, "Oh, you've got unresolved issues," and what's interesting is like you didn't even know it until they pointed out, which is really fascinating. What's different about your process compared to others who help people with their messaging? And I know you're very passionate about helping women.
Yeah. So for me, I my approach is very intuitive. One of my purposes, I truly believe, is to demystify the mystical, to make it more approachable. I think that by and large, communities of people have placed labels on mysticism that makes it feel scary, and it's not scary. It's science. And just as we have evolved as humans, what is now considered medicine was once considered witchcraft. And so just, removing the labels and laying it out for what it is for people and being attuned, I think is my edge. Being attuned to the information that I have within myself and helping guide other women to that knowledge as well.
Yeah, I love that. How can people contact you, check you out, check out your work, and so on?
Sure. Yeah. So for people who are on Instagram, you can find me at Amber K Powers, like Austin. So Amber K Powers. And then on Facebook, you can find me. I lead a group of 35,000 women business owners globally. The name of that Facebook group is Women Business Owners Supporting Women Business Owners. So it's just us lifting each other up.
Yeah, I love that. And with that, thanks so much for sharing your story and really talking about spirituality, healing, and all of Amber's resources will be in links and show notes. And thanks so much for coming out to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Christopher. I appreciate it.